Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Maria Whelan with Illinois Action for Children. Thank you all for joining us today to get an update on the governor's proposed budget and its status and what's going on in Springfield more generally. We normally would have done this call very shortly after the governor's budget address. We intentionally decided to delay for a little bit because we had hoped that, given the fact that on the day of the governor's budget address, both the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House indicated that they were supportive of the governor's approach regarding his, quote, recommended budget to avoid his, quote, not recommended budget. And we wanted to just see how this would all play out for a bit and be able to give you a more comprehensive update in terms of how things were evolving around the budget discussions. In fact, there has been very little action on the budget. And this is not good news. We have not seen either chamber take up the critical revenue issue, and they are on vacation for 2 weeks now, and when they get back to Springfield, we really are talking about just over a month of time. Christine Robinson, our Director of Public Policy, will outline what we are facing and what the scenarios are, and she will also be updating everyone on some of the revenue issues that and conversations that we're having. I would just emphasize that time is of the essence. The General Assembly is at home right now, which means they're available to you and to the parents and other community leaders with whom you are in touch. So I would encourage you, as will Christine, to use this time to have an impact. The downside of this budget is truly dire and would absolutely decimate many children, families, and the people who care for them. So again, thank you for being on the call, and let me now introduce and turn this over to our Director of Public Policy, Christine Robinson. Christine.
Thank you, Maria. I'm going to go ahead and get started then with the slides that we've prepared for you today. We're going to begin with, as Maria said, with the revenue side of things. Governor Quinn, when he presented his budget, he presented basically two versions, so a recommended version and a, quote, not recommended version. This is all because we have a situation where at the end of, or on January 1st, 2015, the current tax rates that we're using to determine our revenue estimates are set to expire. So right now, income tax rates are at 5% for individuals. They would revert back to 3.75% if nothing's done by the end of May of this year. that would happen as of January 1st, 2015. So expiration of this tax level would create at minimum a $2.3 billion hole that we're looking at for FY15, and that fiscal year begins July 1st, 2014. So that's what the kind of revenue situation is that we're looking at as we're looking to build and develop this state budget. So when you look at the actual revenue estimates, what you see when we go from 5% to 3.5% as the individual tax rate, we're going to lose $1.8 billion in revenue, but we know that the hole is actually going to be much bigger because of about $500 million in increases in mandatory spending, such as pension payments, Medicaid, debt service, things like that have to be funded. So the revenue hole that we're looking at is actually just over $2 billion. So with the current available revenue, the cuts that we're looking at are detailed here on this slide. So we're looking at $1 billion in cuts to education, $700 million in cuts to human services, $300 million in cuts to public safety, and this is on top of cuts that we've already experienced over the past 5 years. We're up to over $5.7 billion in cuts to human services, Medicaid. We have got 6,000 fewer state employees, so this isn't a matter of the state not having made cuts over the last several fiscal years. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what's our situation here. I said a tale of two budget proposals. So the recommended proposal that Governor Quinn would like to see enacted includes extension of the current income tax rate. So there would have to be a bill passed by the end of May, which is when this current session expires, that would extend income tax rates at their current levels. Because that requires legislative action, he also submitted his not recommended budget, which follows current law. So that's the loss of about $2 billion in revenue. And as you can imagine, the cuts that are required in order to meet that are pretty significant. So I'm going to highlight a few of those cuts. These are cuts that are on the table. The state agencies have been going before the General Assembly to detail what those cuts would look like, and that's where we're getting these numbers. So in the State Board of Education, we would be looking at a $17 million reduction to the Early Childhood Block Grant. So that would mean about another 5,000 3- and 4-year-olds losing access to school readiness programming. And we've already been cut about $97 million since the peak of funding for the Preschool for All program in FY09. Other things that would be happening, we'd be flat funding bilingual education where we know that we need increases. There'd be $185 million cut to general state aid. The governor has talked about things like layoffs from classroom teachers, anywhere around 13,000 teachers being laid off. So these are significant and dire numbers. With regard to the Department of Human Services, we'd be looking at about a $60 million cut to child care services, so that's the Child Care Assistance Program. Right now in FY14, we know that CCAP is over budget by about $60 million, and this is just because of increased cost pressures. It costs more to do the same amount of services, and that cost increase would be carried over into FY15. The Department of Human Services was in the General Assembly last week presenting their budget to the House Human Services Appropriations Committee, and in their presentation they detailed what some of these cuts would look like in terms of impact on children and families. And the numbers that they are pointing to is that they're estimating in order to meet their budget line, it would mean a reduction in 41,269 children in the Child Care Assistance Program, and that over 32,000 providers could be forced to close. Because of the cuts that they'd be making in state funding and changes to the state program, that would put at risk about $208 million in federal funding. So the numbers could actually be worse. Those are bad, but they could be worse. We don't have a lot of information about how those cuts would be implemented, but you could imagine they'd be program changes around things that the department has the authority to change, like rates for providers, co-pays that are charged to parents, income eligibility for the program itself. So in addition to child care, there's of course other human service programs that would receive pretty devastating cuts. Numbers that the Department of Human Services has been using are about 18,000 teens would lose after-school programs. more than 2 million food pantry clients would not be served, and you can see the list goes on and on. This is not a budget that that we can support in any way, shape, or form. So I want to move on just briefly to the governor's recommended budget. So this, again, is the budget that is only a possibility. It's only viable if the current rate structure is extended, and that would take the General Assembly passing a bill to continue the income tax rates that are currently in existence. So should that happen, what the governor's proposing and what we support would be a $166 million increase to child care that would maintain current caseload. Right now, we know that the cost per child for the child care assistance program is higher than it's been in years past. Even though the caseload isn't rising, it's becoming more expensive to provide the same amount of care because parents are choosing high-quality settings more often. We're seeing a shift towards center-based care and away from family, friend, and neighbor care, or license-exempt care, which is a good thing, but it costs money, and quality is expensive, and we need to fund it at that level. The other part of the rate increase, or the increase for the child care assistance program that the governor is recommending, would also fund rate increases for home-based providers and center-based providers. And there is also a proposal to increase funding for early intervention. On the State Board of Education side of things, the governor's proposal includes a $25 million increase for the Early Childhood Block Grant. This would restore part of what's been cut over the last 6 years. So if you remember, the last several years we've received cuts to the Early Childhood Block Grant. We're up to about $80 million over the last 6 years. So this would be a partial restoration of those cuts. There would be an increase of $11 million to bilingual education, and all of these investments for child care and early learning would be what the governor's office is talking about as a $100 million down payment, quote unquote, on his proposed $1.5 billion investment in his larger Birth to 5 initiative. Outside of the early childhood world, there's other increases across the board, including $50 million to MAP grants. That's helping Illinois students afford college, and some targeted tax relief to homeowners through property taxes, and continuing to pay down past due bills. We know that we're still not making up the ground that we need to in terms of our past due bills. But again, none of this would happen without an extension of the current tax rates. So those are the two proposals that are on the table and being debated right now. What I want to talk a little bit is a third way. So if the first way is continuing the status quo of the flat income tax at 5% and making these investments that the governor is proposing. The second way would be reverting back to the 3.75% individual tax rate, and then also making substantial cuts to state services to make up for that over $2 billion lost in revenue. And then there's this third way that's being debated. So moving to a fair tax, a graduated income tax structure similar to the federal income tax structure, where there's lower rates assigned to lower incomes and higher rates assigned to higher incomes. So this would require a change to our state constitution, which gets very complicated and very tricky, and it's not an easy process, nor should it be. So I want to talk a little bit about the path towards doing that. In order to make a change to the Constitution, the House and the Senate by May 1st need to pass a resolution with 3/5 majority of both houses. And this resolution, it's been introduced. It has support in both houses. The language simply says that it would strike the language in the Constitution saying that Illinois must have a flat income tax. Right now, that's what our Constitution says. And it adds language that says that the income tax may be fair, where lower rates apply to lower income levels and higher rates apply to higher income levels. So assuming that resolution passes by May 1st, then that question would go to voters in November. So when you show up at the polls in November, you would see a question on your ballot that says there's proposals out there to change our state income tax structure so that lower incomes could be charged at lower rates and higher incomes could be charged at higher rates. Do you agree with this? Yes or no? So if a majority of voters then at their polling places in November, if a majority of voters agree with that and they vote yes, then the General Assembly goes back and has the authority to pass a bill that would establish a new rate structure that could have those lower rates for lower incomes and higher rates for higher incomes. So not an easy task, and the first hurdle that we need to get over is this May 1st deadline of the House and the Senate passing this resolution so that the question can go to voters in November. So I want to talk a little bit more about what this fair tax proposal includes in terms of the rate structure. The rate structure, proposed rate structure, has come out. The rate structure that's being discussed would actually be a tax cut for 94% of taxpayers. So if you're making less than $205,000 a year, you'd be receiving a tax cut under this proposal. If you want to find out exactly how you'd be impacted, you could go to the website that's listed here, www.fairtaxcut.com, and enter your income, and it'll show you what your current tax liability is and what it would be under this proposal. Statewide, there's been a lot of polling around this idea. The idea in general is pretty broadly supported. This tax rate structure specifically, there was a poll done a couple of weeks ago showing that over 64% of likely voters are supportive of this rate structure. So it's an idea that has a lot of support. It's gained a lot of momentum, and we're encouraging folks to have these tough conversations with their legislators so that the debate continues in Springfield. And one more note on this fair tax proposal. It gets a little bit muddy as we're talking about the FY15 budget. The two issues are separate. So it's important to know a couple of things about this fair tax proposal. The first thing is that it's revenue neutral. It raises about the same amount of revenue that we raise now, not more. So passing this resolution alone isn't enough to solve our budget problems for the coming fiscal year and beyond. It doesn't address the issue of the revenue that we currently raise being set to expire if the rates are allowed to revert to their pre-2011 levels, and it doesn't raise more money. So the fair tax issue is an important one, and we're encouraging people to be supportive of it, but it doesn't solve the problem in its entirety. So even if the fair tax resolution is passed by the General Assembly on May 1st, the cuts we talked about earlier would still go into effect if the current tax rates are allowed to revert. So let's talk a little bit about next steps. I'm going to talk about the fair tax proposal first, since this is the first and most immediate deadline. So again, the resolution needs to come out of the General Assembly. The House and the Senate need to pass it with supermajorities by May 1st. So May 1st might sound like a few weeks away, but as Maria said, the legislature is currently on spring break. They're home for the next 2 weeks. They get back on April 29th, and we'll then have 3 days to get this thing through. So time is of the essence. What you're seeing on your slide here is the listing. It's House Joint Resolution Constitutional Amendment 49 is the House version of the resolution, and Senate Joint Resolution Constitutional Amendment 40 is the Senate version of the resolution. So that's, if you care to go and look for more information, those are the bill numbers that you're looking into. You can also, if you click on those links, you can see lists of supporters who signed on as co-sponsors for both of those bills. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you who's signed on currently. So the ask with regard to the fair tax amendment is to call your representative and senator and ask them to support the fair tax proposal. Many representatives and senators are already signed on to support the fair tax. And so if they are, we're asking you to still make those phone calls. You're not asking for their support. You're calling to thank them for their support. There is going to be a rally in Springfield on April 29th. We're encouraging all of our members to join with us and A Better Illinois to rally in Springfield in support of the fair tax. You can register. I'm not sure if these links are live. You can click on this link here, register here, or contact Catherine Rivera. Oh, Maya's telling me they're not live. So you can register on our website. You can also email Catherine, our Community Engagement Associate, to sign up to attend the rally. There is going to be bus transportation from many locations throughout the state, and we're going to try and get our members on buses wherever you are. We're going to work with you to try and find a convenient pickup and drop-off location. So again, that's April 29th. I'm going to give you guys a pause here for a moment and let you look at these two lists that are on this slide. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a listing of the Senate sponsors. These are senators who have signed on to co-sponsor the Fair Tax Amendment in the Senate. And in the right-hand column, these are the House sponsors of the House version of that same resolution. So these are your representatives that have signed on as co-sponsors to that bill. So if you see your senator and or your representative on these lists, you're calling to say thank you. And if you don't see them on these lists, you're calling to say, please co-sponsor these bills, or at least vote in favor of them so that voters have the option to weigh in on this question of whether Illinois should move to a graduated income tax structure. So in addition to action steps around the fair tax, again, we need to be in our legislators' ears around the current income tax rates and asking them not to let them expire and go back to those pre-2011 rates. So when you call your senator and your representative, in addition to talking to them about the fair tax, you're also talking to them about extending the current tax rates and supporting the proposals that the governor has made around increasing investments to child care and early learning. At this point, it's hard to say where the strategy is going to be after May 1st. So what we're asking folks to do is to take these two steps right now, focus on the next couple of weeks, getting phone calls, letters, emails, in-person visits in district offices, and then we're going to regroup after May 1st, see where we're at with the fair tax proposal, see where we're at with the state budget for FY15, and you'll be seeing more alerts from us as the days go on. So for right now, I'm going to look to Maya and see if there's any questions that have been submitted already, or if not, this is the time to submit your questions. You can do that using the webinar technology. You should have a toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen, and there's a box that says questions. You can enter your question there, and we'll see it. You can also enter it in the chat box, and we'll see it. I'll give you a moment or two to get your questions in. We'll answer as many as we can. Someone's asking to see the list again. So I'm going to move away from the question slide and go back to the list of sponsors so that you can have a few more minutes to see if your senator and representative are on those sponsor lists. Okay, there's a few questions coming in. I have the sponsor list up there, so please, take a look at those again. If you need to look up who your legislator is, you can do so on the General Assembly's website. It's www.ilga.gov. There's another question about whether you can get a copy of the presentation. The answer is yes. We'll be posting this following the broadcast. We'll also post a recording of it as well. So if folks that weren't able to listen live, they can listen to a recording of it later. Okay, I'm going to turn the phone over to Maria for a few parting remarks. Again, if you have questions, please submit them now. If we don't get to answer your question during the webinar, we're able to see who's submitting the question. So if we can't answer your question now, we'll get back to you with an email or a phone call. So I'm going to turn it over to Maria.
So just to reiterate, everyone, again, thank you for being on the call. I do think it really is important for us to shake off the malaise of winter and the overwhelming workload that many folks carry these days. and really push ourselves in these next couple of weeks. If we are not able to maintain the current tax structure, we will be looking at devastation for children and families in many, many sectors. So I really encourage everyone to make those calls, make appointments, invite your legislators over to your programs, take your parents on a Saturday, do whatever is required to be a voice for people who need you to be their voice. Thanks again, and any questions that come in post this call, we will make sure that we address. Stay in good touch. Let us know if you get any good scuttlebutt, and work hard for these next 2 weeks. Happy spring, everyone.